Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. Last week's tragic school shooting in Parkland, Florida left the whole country again asking, why? What's going on? What has happened to America? 1962 was a pivotal year in the history of American education. That year, there were almost no gun laws, but no school shootings either. That shows that the problem now cannot be guns alone. In the entire 18th century, there was one recorded school shooting in the United States. That rose to 28 in the 19th century and 227 in the 20th. The 21st century is only 18 years old, and the number has already reached 207. So what's going on? What causes a student to fire a gun at his teachers and classmates? Though there were several factors, I believe it starts with the belief that human beings are mere accidents of evolution. That idea reduces the meaning of a human life to that of a garbage truck. Abortion laws reinforce this concept. If unborn human beings have no worth, then why treat classmates as if they have worth? As Christians, we know that every human being was made in God's image. That gives us value and meaning. Jesus emphasized our worth by paying the ultimate price for our redemption. Every person senses that he or she really is significant. Deep down, they all know that they have real, even, transcendent meaning. So, they search for it. In their search, they notice that our society honors people on TV, in the movies, or on stage. From the outside, fame seems to create meaning and fulfillment. But fame can be difficult. It usually requires hard work and success. But there is an easier way. Instead of becoming famous, become infamous. That might mean breaking the law, but young people are taught that morality is flexible. They are constantly reminded that one set of moral values is as good as another. And if there are no absolute moral standards, good and evil have no meaning. Everybody knows who Lee Harvey Oswald was, and all he did was pull a trigger. Infamy made easy. Before the Columbine shooting, the killers videotaped themselves discussing the attacks. One of them said, "Isn't it fun to get the respect we're going to deserve?" He thought they would be respected and that they would deserve that respect. He saw the world in terms of the video games he played incessantly. Each kill would be a point. A high body count means a high score, just like a video game. Psychologists tell us that children feel powerless. That's why they have traditionally been drawn to superheroes. They want to identify with power. Today, video games offer children guns to give them a fantasy of power. The children then use those guns for hours on end. Killing and killing and killing. A kid playing a video game can kill thousands in a single sitting. The more firepower the child has, the more satisfaction he feels when he pulls the trigger. Dave Grossman is a former Army Ranger and West Point psychology professor. He is an expert on what turns people into killers. Author of Stop Teaching Our Kids to Kill, Grossman wrote about the young man who slaughtered first graders at Sandy Hook Elementary. The brutal, merciless, savage mass murder of first graders in Connecticut was another in a long line of avid video game players who turned their sick fantasy into our tragic reality. In an editorial for Variety, he wrote, "From a military and law enforcement perspective, violent video games are murder simulators that train kids to kill." Dr. William Pollack is a clinical psychologist at Harvard Medical School. After the Columbine shootings, he said, "My question is, how come more don't do it?" It's an interesting question. I think this answer is found in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus told his followers, "You are the salt of the earth." He said those words before the invention of refrigeration. The people he spoke to knew the importance of salt in preserving against corruption and decay. The presence of Christians, the presence of the Holy Spirit in the lives of Christians, saves lives every single day by restraining evil in the world. There's also a prophetic element to these shootings. 2 Timothy chapter 3 gives a prophecy that describes what human beings will be like during the last days. The description includes without self-control, brutal, haters of good. That's what's happening in the U.S. and elsewhere. Just a few days ago, a young man in Russia shot and killed at least 5 people as they walked out of church. Without self-control, brutal, haters of good. More and more, those things characterize humanity of the 21st century. Since the Parkland shootings, many Americans have publicly proclaimed that they don't think we need God. They march with signs that say, "We don't need thoughts and prayers." The point of prayer, of course, is to invoke God's help. They say they don't need it. The day after the shootings, HuffPost ran a story with the headlines, "People sick of thoughts and prayer demand action after Florida school shootings." Novelist Stephen King wrote, "There will be prayers from Blabbermouth Don, Pence the Grinch, and their right-wing cohorts. There will be no call for any sort of sane gun regs." Kim Kardashian tweeted, "We owe it to our children and our teachers to keep them safe while at school. Prayers won't do this. Action will." Christian teaching holds that prayer is not a substitute for other actions. So, why the war on prayer? We're seeing anger at prayer all over social media. There have been countless editorials decrying those who choose to pray. They act as if prayer is the problem. But in fact, just the opposite is true. The problem comes from the lack of prayer. Earlier, I said that 1962 was a pivotal year in the history of American education. That's the year the U.S. Supreme Court made the long tradition of prayer in public schools unlawful. I doubt one bad Supreme Court decision caused all the mayhem that followed. But the court's decision shows what has been happening in the United States since that time. The knowledge of God has been pushed aside as unimportant. Here's the question. Were there more gun laws in 1962? No. There were fewer. Were there more school shootings in 1962? No. There were none. A lack of gun laws did not cause the various mass shootings that have taken place in America. Something else did, and that something else is typified by the Supreme Court declaring prayer in school illegal. Every time you hear of a school shooting, remember how many school shootings there were when prayer in school was legal. It was a totally different era. In 1962, teachers worried about kids shooting spitballs. Now, they worry about them shooting guns or shooting drugs. Teachers then worried about disciplinary issues like chewing gum and passing notes. Teachers today worry that they will be shot or raped by their own students. We can't go back to 1962, and those days were by no means perfect. Also, I don't want to imply that all gun laws are useless, but as a Christian minister, it is my job to point out that something else, something terrible, is going on. Outlawing prayer in our schools just demonstrated the attitudes that have drastically changed American schools for the worse. Today, even schools that seem peaceful on the outside have become places of terror for many students. The school in Parkland, Florida is an affluent one. The kids there have enormous advantages over their impoverished inner city counterparts. But eventually, the affluent school became a nightmare of violence and rage that not even money could prevent. Each week on the Hal Lindsey Report, I try to show you how today's events are bringing to life the predictions of the ancient prophets. Like a watchman on the wall, I'm warning you that time is short. Christ will soon return for his church, and I want you to be ready to go. And I want you to see how urgent it is that you make certain your family, your friends, and those around you are ready to go too. Please help me continue this work, and help me take the necessary steps to broadcast the Hal Lindsey Report into more homes in America. I need your help now more than ever before.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.
If you only get your news from the mainstream media, then you probably missed this story. It was effectively buried by the big networks. Last week, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted 13 Russian nationals for engaging in what the Russians call information warfare. In 2016, on this program, I warned that undermining the integrity of the election seems to be part of Russia's new posture of aggression against the West. The DOJ indictment says that by 2016, the Russians used their fictitious online persona to interfere with the 2016 U.S. presidential election. They engaged in operations primarily intended to communicate derogatory information about Hillary Clinton, to denigrate other candidates such as Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and to support Bernie Sanders and then-candidate Donald Trump. Like most of the world, the Russians thought Hillary Clinton would win the presidency. They wanted her to arrive at the White House politically weakened and presiding over a deeply divided America. So, they pushed her main opponents, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. According to the indictment, their purpose was not to get one side elected, but to spread distrust toward the candidates and the political system in general. The indictment also says, after the election of Donald Trump in or around November 2016, defendants and their co-conspirators used false U.S. personas to organize and coordinate U.S. political rallies in support of then-President-elect Trump, while simultaneously using other false U.S. personas to organize and coordinate U.S. political rallies protesting the results of the 2016 U.S. presidential election. That means they played both sides of the street, for Trump and against Trump. In a press conference announcing the indictment, U.S. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said,
"Now, there is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity."
In other words, there's no official accusation yet of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. Rosenstein went on to say,
there is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
the DOJ confirms that Russian activities did not change the outcome of the elections. Their goal was to stir things up, sow confusion, and fuel the fires of anger. They wanted to bog us down with infighting, and they obviously found some willing partners on the American political scene. Again, President Trump nailed it with a tweet. He said that the Russians apparently succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. There are reports that President Trump will host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House on March 5th. It will probably be a welcome respite from the Prime Minister's troubles in Jerusalem. As I mentioned last week, Israeli police have recommended that Netanyahu be indicted on bribery charges. They allege that he did favors for wealthy businessmen in exchange for gifts. The first businessman always mentioned in these reports is Arnon Milchan. He is an Israeli billionaire and Hollywood film producer. Over the years, he has rendered extremely valuable service to Israel and to the Mossad. He is publicly recognized for it. Milchan allegedly sent Netanyahu cigars and champagne. That's why the scandal is often called Cigargate. The police allege that Netanyahu spoke to then Secretary of State John Kerry about assistance for Milchan in renewing his U.S. visa. The late Shimon Peres was revered by the left in Israel. President Peres once did exactly the same thing to help exactly the same man. Yet no one protested or investigated him. Netanyahu staunchly denies all the allegations. He says that he only sought to help a valued Israeli citizen who had rendered great service to Israel. On a personal note, I have to say that these accusations do not fit the man I know and who appeared on the first Hal Lindsey Report. Consider this. The central witness against Netanyahu just happened to also be his chief rival for the job of Prime Minister Yair Lapid. Lapid leads the left-leaning Yesh Atid political party. How can a political rival be considered an unbiased witness? Further, former prominent national police figures are members of the party. That's one of the reasons I tend to believe Caroline Glick of the Jerusalem Post. She wrote, "The reason these events are happening is because Netanyahu is hated by Israel's entrenched elites who benefited most from the way things used to be, and they would like very much to unseat him." Sound familiar? Ms. Glick also wrote, "The cases for which Netanyahu has been investigated and which the police now recommend his indictment are not serious. Benjamin Netanyahu has been prime minister twice. Both times he inherited tremendous difficulties and great dangers. When he took the job in 1996 and again in 2009, he had to clean up some big mistakes made by previous leaders. He's still dealing with the fallout from their eras, but he has done a remarkable job, even a historic job. I truly believe God lifted him up to be Prime Minister of Israel during the years he has served, and I hope in coming years as well."
Hal Lindsey is pleased to present his newest audiobook, Vanished into Thin Air, read in its entirety by Joel Weldon.
The moment Paul uses the word mystery, it signals that he is going to reveal a new truth not known before.
In this book, Hal Lindsey answers the questions most often asked. What is the rapture? When will it take place? Who will go? He explains in clear, easy-to-understand terms the answers to these and many other doctrinal issues surrounding the rapture of the church. Vanished into Thin Air is now available as an audio download for $24.99. You can purchase your audiobook of Vanished into Thin Air by visiting the website store at hallindsey.com.
God made a covenant with Abraham. In it, he promised to make Abraham's name great and bless him personally. God also vowed that he would bless those people who blessed Abraham and curse those who cursed him. Ancient and modern history give evidence to the fulfillment of this prediction. Just trace the fate of nations who persecuted the Jews and those who supported them. There were other extremely important promises embodied in God's covenant with Abraham. He was to become the father of many nations, not just one. Kings would come from this lineage, and God would be the God of Abraham and his seed forever. God promised Abraham a specific piece of real estate. It became known as the Promised Land. It's been a hot topic ever since. But in Genesis chapter 15, verses 18 through 20, God promised to Abraham's seed the entire area from the river of Egypt, not the Nile, but an ancient one thought to be near the present Suez Canal, to the Euphrates River. It was given as an eternal possession. Eventually, Abraham had many sons, but the promises of the covenant were renewed to only one, Isaac. In Genesis chapter 21, verse 12, God said to Abraham, "Through Isaac your descendants shall be named." Isaac had twin sons, Jacob and Esau. But for reasons of his own, God chose only Jacob as the one through whom the promises to Abraham's seed would be given. So, the promises of God's great covenant became true only to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. People throughout history have resented the concept of a chosen people. They wondered why God chose to isolate one nation and give it providential treatment. To find the answer, we need to look at the world of Abraham's day. The spiritual condition of mankind was at a low ebb. A great deal of time had elapsed since God first created man. At the beginning, he had revealed to humanity the joys and responsibilities of having a relationship with a holy and personally knowable God. He renewed this knowledge to Noah. But humanity kept falling into polytheism, the worship of many gods. The world of Abraham's day was almost totally pagan. It's amazing that the Lord could find a man like Abraham who was still sensitive to the voice of God and would faithfully act on what he was told. God had a plan for drawing mankind back to himself. He chose this man and his descendants to be the showcase to the world. Sometimes God would showcase his chosen people by what he did through them. At other times, he would showcase them by what he had to do to them. Here are some reasons God called the Hebrew race into existence. The first reason was to speak through them. Their prophets were to receive and write down God's revelations of himself and his will for mankind. They were also to record the history of his dealing with their race. His revelation through them would include things that were future or prophetic in nature. The second reason the Jews were chosen was to protect and preserve the textual purity of scriptures God inspired them to write. The degree of success which the Jewish scribes and rabbis had in doing this is one of the wonders of ancient times. For centuries, holy men of Israel gave their whole lives to copying, studying, and interpreting their law as given to Moses, as well as the writings of the prophets. The third reason the Jewish nation was called into existence was to show the world that there is only one true God. He wanted them to show God's love for humanity and his desire to be reconciled to them. In their 4,000 years of existence, the Jews were not always willing witnesses of this to the world. Their rebellion against God's word caused them to be scattered around the world. But out of that dispersion, God used them to spread the knowledge of himself to heathen nations who might never have heard of him any other way. The Jews were chosen by God for so many things that are of ultimate importance to the world, but especially to all believers. For it was through this chosen line of people that Messiah, our Lord Jesus Christ, entered the world. For this reason alone, we should bless them and be thankful to God. But God promises to bless all, both individuals and nations, not just believers, who bless and protect his chosen people, the Jews. Well, that's all for tonight, folks. God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit HalLindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.